Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. 'Tis I, the man with the most delicious hair in all of Wargaming, and welcome to 2D6 Friday. Bum, 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 bum. I'm afraid that's about the best musical quality you're going to get on this show. I do have deep musical skills. I just don't feel I should be putting them out there on a show that potentially might not get that many viewers since it's episode number 1. So I want to save my voice and my vocal stylings. Maybe when we're about episode 8, people know what to expect, they know when to tune in. So folks, of course, 2D6 Friday. What is that exactly? Well, as you may know, I've been running an Age of Sigmar specific discussion show for the last year, and I felt like it was about time to sink my fangs and spill the juices of other wargaming systems down my chin, rather than just pure Age of Sigmar. So on this show, we're going to be discussing any game that takes my interest, any game that tickles my fancy, any game that floats my boat, as it were. So that could be 40k, Kings of War, Dead Zone, Bolt Action, all of the above. Time will tell. And we've got quite a few viewers in here already. Let's have a look at the good old active users list, shall we, to see who we've got here tonight. We've got Bazooka J Rambo, Gloomdready Gaming, Graham Rigg, Luke's APS, Master Dwarlin, Ramv, Skeleton Flower, and of course YouTube Newbie. No one can have a live show without him. So quite a few people in the house, and we've got a plethora of topics to be delving into tonight. By the way, for the record, I hope no one got too attached to this green backdrop, because in my eBay basket right now, guess what colour it is? Orange. So once I've confirmed it's the right kind of material, so it's not going to be weirdly reflecting the light or anything, that is going to be ordered. And people may well be blinded on future episodes of this and all my other shows. So you have been forewarned. Now, first things first, there's a little topic I want to touch on. And let's get the old screen share going. Because on the old GW website, look at this. White Dwarf is moving back to a monthly magazine. Bum, bum, bum. That is some seriously big news. So, folks, does that mean that it was a total flop as a weekly magazine? Or are there other factors involved here? Is this admitting that they made a mistake? Or have circumstances changed so that maybe it wasn't a mistake before, but the current environment, the way it is now, it just means that it's time to go back? What do we think, folks? Because I used to be a big avid reader of White Dwarf when I was but a wee lad. I used to have a subscription for quite a few years. It was one of my Christmas presents, which, looking back, it was quite a hefty chunk of change for a Christmas present as well. So that probably explains why I didn't get too much else a few years. But anyway, it's going to have all this juicy stuff in there, like battle reports are going to be coming back, designer notes and such. Because the way the current White Dwarf is, the weekly one, I was not really a big fan at all. The only reason I actually ever purchased the current White Dwarf was if they had either a free miniature with it that I happened to want, or it had some particular rules in there. I think I got 2 issues of White Dwarf around the launch of Age of Sigmar because I wanted to look at the rules in there, and it had the free Stormcast Eternal with it. But for the price, I don't think I actually read a single word outside of the very specific articles that I bought it for. So it probably wasn't worth the money for that. But if it's going back monthly and it has all that juicy content in there, I'm not saying it'll get me to buy it again, but there could be a whole generation of little youngsters out there who can peel themselves away from their phones, maybe. I don't know, are they living in the past trying to push a publication like that in the first place when they could be doing everything online? Let's see what the people in the audience are saying about this. Dreddy might actually get the monthly White Dwarf again, so there's one customer at least. YouTube Newbie going back to the classic old days, having extra rules and content in it like it used to. Yep. And I wonder if this means Visions is disappearing forever. Has that already disappeared? I don't know. I haven't seen Visions anywhere in a while. Let's see, Luke's APS may even get a subscription from me. Now, Luke, are you really going to give GW some of your money? Or are you going to find a way to make your own White Dwarf on the cheap from spare parts? I know your game. YouTube Newbie, it used to be full of content turned into a catalogue. Yes, that is very true. Although technically you could say it was always a catalogue, because the end goal was always to sell you things, but it wasn't like it is now. Back in the day, you would have terrain that they didn't actually sell featured in battle reports, for example. You would still see some of their cardboard buildings in the battle reports, but you would also see things that people had just made themselves. What they want now is for you to, whenever you look at something in a picture, they want you to be able to purchase that. If you say, I really like that bit of earth that model is standing on, rather than the model itself, they want you to be able to buy that bit of earth. That's definitely the direction their business has gone in the last few years. Let's see, Skeleton Flower might do some cooking while watching the show. Well, I suppose my luxurious hair does make people salivate with envy and hunger, so I'm not entirely surprised there. Let's see, Dreddy. The weekly White Dwarf is very weak, only bought 2 when the Skitari rules were in it. Yeah, that seems to be the case with a lot of people. They only buy it when there's something very specific directed towards something they want in there. Bazooka J. Rambo is hoping it'll be like the good old days, stories to read, full designer, in-depth info, blah, 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 blah. Hopefully it's got interesting text in there. It's difficult to make me read things in the first place. I'm not a big reader of books. So if they have interesting articles in there, if they could get me to read it, that would be a big success. I should be the benchmark. Let's see, Bazooka J. Rambo, I think Visions will be gone. I think they couldn't support 2 magazines, and maybe it was too much for them to keep up with a weekly magazine. Yeah, I think Visions, I don't see the purpose in Visions unless you want the prettiest toilet paper in all the world. You don't even need something to read while sitting on the toilet anymore, because people have their phones. Not that I would ever do that, because I'd be terribly paranoid about dropping my phone into the toilet. But I'm sure other people don't worry about that and do all kinds of web browsing on their phone while utilizing the facilities, as they say. Yeah, I think electronic is the way to go, and monthly White Dwarf scaling back the amount of publications they're putting out. Maybe that's a sign of that, or maybe this is just one last death throw in the life cycle of White Dwarf. We shall see. I don't know, 46, I hope Visions doesn't vanish. Well, if it does, you can always look up high quality images online that you can zoom in on, can't you? Newbie never cared about Visions, not an expert painter, so all the styles that he wants to use are already in the codexes and army books. Yep, fair enough. Right then, so a few of the topics I want to look at this week. First of all, a lot of games are heading into their 2nd or 3rd editions very soon. It's a big thing at the moment. Every game pretty much seems to have either recently changed edition or it's on the verge of heading into a new one. Quite a lot of them, in fact. So if anyone out there can name a game for me that's about to go into a new edition or just had a new one put out, then let me know in case it's not on my list, and then I'll tell you whether or not it grabs me at all by the gonads and has me interested in picking up that game. So a few that I've made a note of that are either recently moving into a newer edition or will be shortly. Dead Zone have gone to their 2nd edition, and I bought the 1st edition after playing one demo game over 2 years ago at Adepticon, and bought it right there on the spot. But then I never actually played it because I didn't have anyone to play it against. No one I knew was interested in playing it, and I've still got the little cards for the factions still wrapped up in plastic. So that tells you how little play it's had. I did enjoy assembling the terrain though. I'm not too happy with the paint job I did on the miniatures, and the terrain still needs painting at all. But that is what I'm working on right now, actually, because with the version 2 of Dead Zone, that's actually sparked the interest and pricked up the ears of a few people in my local vicinity, and they're interested in trying out Dead Zone version 2, and some people have actually bought into it big time. So hopefully I'll have some opponents very, very soon for that. A couple of people around here. Let's see, Luke's APS Dead Zone 2nd edition is great. That's good to hear. And also, inspired by possibly getting into Dead Zone 2nd edition, I did base up some of my little random Forge Fathers. I think I got these in one of the Mantic crazy bags or crazy boxes ages ago, or maybe from the bargain bin at the open day a year or 2 ago, perhaps. So Dead Zone, definitely, that's on my list. Let's see what else. War Machine apparently is heading for a new edition. However, this is one game that hasn't grabbed me anywhere, really, especially not by the gonads. One issue that I have with War Machine is, well, one thing I don't have an issue with is that the rules are incredibly solid. It's a really well put together rule system, as far as I can tell. There's no issues at all with it. It's very balanced, apparently. However, most games, when you play them, you can kind of play a game without knowing what you're doing at all and still have fun, and probably not win, but you might be able to accomplish one or two things. However, when it comes to War Machine, if you don't know what you're doing, you immediately lose, pretty much. I think it always has kind of an instant death condition. So if you lose your commander, then you just lose immediately. So if you don't know what the other army does, because you haven't played very much before, and they say, well, actually, this model can teleport here and stab your commander, and you can't do anything back because this model has used its ability that's frozen time, so you just lose immediately. So there is a barrier to entry of knowledge base. It seems that you need to put in a decent amount of research if you want to jump into an existing War Machine scene. If you're starting up with someone who's at the same skill and experience level as you, then you shouldn't have any issues. Oh, some people not being very nice about War Machine in the comments here. 2 people have called it Bore Machine already. Hashtag Bore Machine. Let's get that trending, shall we? Let's see, anyone else had anything said there? Skeleton Flower War Machine is a very harsh system, that's for sure. Yep, Luke's APS, I can't play anything more complex than Kings of War. It is very complex. Like I said, though, the basic framework of the War Machine rules are fine. It's just the specific unit rules will catch you out and immediately defeat you if you don't know what you're facing. At least that's my experience. If anyone has a conflicting view, then let me know. But it's just not my cup of tea. In fact, it's not even in my teapot, let alone the cup. So it doesn't really interest me at all. Another game, I'm not sure if it's on the imminent horizon, but it will be coming up at some point. Bolt Action, 2nd edition. This interests me very much because, as you know, as you should know if you've been following this channel, I have a Belgian army for Bolt Action. They're not the most powerful, but every game I've played has been fun. I've never had a bad game of Bolt Action. The only problems I saw in the rules were just a couple of minor things that seem to be somewhat overpowered, like, for example, vehicles with the Recce rule, which apparently is going to be toned down in 2nd edition. And flamethrowers, I didn't face them too much, but apparently they were quite overpowered, especially on vehicles, but I definitely never faced a vehicle with a flamethrower on it that I can recall. A lot of the games of Bolt Action I played weren't against the most top tier of lists because people knew I was playing as Belgians and just brought more kind of early war stuff rather than the absolute beast tanks that I wouldn't even be able to dent with my most powerful weapons. In fact, the Belgian list, the word heavy only appears in it twice. So that should tell you everything you need to know. And the word super definitely doesn't appear whatsoever. In fact, the word pitiful appears in the Belgian list more than the word super. So what does that tell you? And that's not even a joke. Slow, pitifully slow is one of the rules that one of the Belgian tanks has. So I'm looking forward to the 2nd edition of that, which should reinvigorate my interest a bit, because I've kind of cooled off on Bolt Action lately, focusing on other games, like Age of Sigmar and Kings of War mostly in the last few months. But Bolt Action, it's definitely in my top few rule systems, because, like I said, it's always fun. And it's unpredictable as well with the alternating, well, not exactly alternating, but the activation system where the dice come out the bag. There aren't too many games that have anything like that, where it's kind of, you could call it like a fog of war almost, where you don't know who's going to act next. And I very much like that feature. And I've got my Belgians ready to roll. I've got a few of them I still need to paint, but I just stopped working on them to focus on other things while my attention was elsewhere. But I have a feeling Bolt Action could be one of my big games when the next edition comes out. Hopefully they spruce up the Belgians in there a little bit. It would be nice, because apparently the Belgians did actually fight quite well in the war. They were just horribly outnumbered and abandoned by all their allies, which was unfortunate for them. Let's see what people are saying about Bolt Action then. YouTube Newbie thinks it looks pretty damn good. Let's see. Dreddy loves Bolt Action, but doesn't get to play it that much. Bazooka J. Rambo is interested in Gates of Antares. Well, I've heard mixed reports on Gates of Antares. On the one hand, it's like Bolt Action, which means I should like it very much. But on the other hand, I've heard that some of the additions maybe overcomplicate matters, whereas Bolt Action kept it simple. maybe they went a bit too far with extra things they shoved in there and got a bit carried away. That's what I'm hearing anyway. Very, very mixed reports. The community that it does have seems to be very enthusiastic about it, but there are some naysayers out there. So I don't have any first-hand experience of it yet. Maybe I'll give it a try at some point. So what else? Someone mentioned Malifaux up there. I'm not sure whether that's got a new edition coming up or whether it just had one. But I've played 2 games of Malifaux at consecutive Adepticon years, and I have a 1 win and 1 loss record, even though the first one that I won was technically a demo game. But I did lose the second one quite fairly. And I was thinking of getting into it. I picked out a faction and everything. I can't remember what they were called, but they were suitably disturbing looking, as all the Malifaux factions are. But for one reason or another, other things just jumped ahead in the queue, and then I just never got round to it. There are a couple of people around here that play Malifaux, though. I believe they still do, last time I checked. So it could be on the agenda in the future. It's not a huge financial investment to get into it, although I hear it is a huge investment on frustration, trying to assemble the models, like individual tiny noses and beards that you have to attach. Like, if I was a Malifaux model, I bet this beard here, this beautifully stylish, ultra-manly facial hair, would actually be a separate piece of the miniature. That's how bad it is, or so I've heard. I've even seen t-shirts that say something like, I survived the masochistic Malifaux assembly or something. Can't remember exactly what it says. Let's see what else I've got on the list. So 40k, of course, rumoured that there's going to be a new edition of that coming very soon, which does interest me a lot, because my interest in 40k fluctuates over time. When I actually play it with the right people, which is every time, because I don't play it competitively, I only play really light-hearted fun games, usually with silly scenarios involving like the Emperor's sewage network or something. But under those circumstances, I find it a lot of fun. It's just when I'm not playing it, it doesn't really draw me in anymore, and I lose interest. Like, for example, I've had these Dark Angels, this Devastator squad, just a loose plasma cannon there without a torso, partially painted. These have been sat on my painting table for, it's got to be over a year now. And there's a Deathwing Knight at the back over there as well. But it just doesn't inspire me most of the time unless I'm actually playing it. So if I don't get something painted within the week of me finishing the game, then that's usually a bad sign. I usually won't get it finished at all. But with the potential for a new edition coming up, that does get me somewhat interested. I was really hesitant with the current edition because it came so hot on the heels of the one before it. So I didn't want to buy the rule book and invest too much into it, knowing that if they're going to be changing the edition every year and a half, what's the point? But they've left it a bit longer this time. So I'd be tempted to look at the rule book this time. Oh, and a topic later, I'm going to discuss why my Deathwing army, I don't feel particularly measures up. But I've got a partially finished Crab Chaos Space Marine army as well, which doesn't have many units in it. And I was on the verge of starting an all-grot army, heavily mechanized with a lot of grot tanks. I've got a huge box of vehicles, some of which are actual grot tanks and some of which are from other alternate companies, which I'm going to do a little bit of converting on and make them into grot tanks. But with the impending arrival of the next edition, or so rumour says, that's what my shoeshine boy tells me anyway, then I'm hesitant to do anything with any of my armies until I know exactly what they're changing in the rules. Because as fun as it is to just play 40k with a really weak list, eventually you do get tired of just everything being instantly blown up in turn 1, which happens to me occasionally. And I've actually got some pictures from a recent 40k game that I'll get to later after I discuss why I think Deathwing suck monkey nuts. Let's see what people are saying in the comments here. Skeleton Flower, yes, Jan Lowe's beard. That's the one I've heard so much about. That Malifaux model with the really difficult beard to stick on. Dreddy thinks that My Little Pony will be the new competitive game once it's out. Well, as far as I know, there's only a My Little Pony role-playing game and not a miniatures war game. But there is probably a gap in the market for it. Though there was that guy with the Bretonnian army in 8th edition Warhammer that was all My Little Pony. So a precedent has been set, you might say. Let's see, I don't know 46 says, do it, Andy, in all caps. I don't know what he's talking about because there's no reference there. With the slight delay on the comments, I don't know. YouTube newbie, detachable facial hair. Wars. Oh, Detachable Facial Hair Wars. Detachable Facial Hair Wars would be an amazing game, or any kind of franchise. Imagine that as like Star Wars films, but with detachable facial hair doing all the fighting. I'm sure there was an episode of Dexter's Laboratory where all the really manly, like rugged guys had really big beards, and they fought with them. And Dexter put like a potion on his face maybe, and he grew a really manly beard, and they were dueling with their beards. It was absolutely amazing. That's what actually inspired me to grow this beard, because I wanted to grow it so long that I could sharpen it and like sword fight people with it. That would be incredible. Let's see. Graham Rigg is talking about being on the floor covered in plastic shavings that are the same shape and colour as some of the pieces. I'm sure he's talking about Malifaux there. Yes, on the carpet in this room, actually, it's very, very dark, and it's hard to see when a piece of plastic falls to the ground. So if there are shavings of plastic and tiny little pieces, like little hands or tiny heads, there's one Dead Zone plague miniature with a really small head that I lost, and I've never actually found it. It's probably in here somewhere, unless it's been vacuumed to death. But I actually got I got the same model again in a Mantic bargain bin, I think, for a really low price, and just took the head off that and used it. Dreddy's talking about my sticky carpet. No, it's not sticky at all. It may have like residue of cornflakes and blackcurrant juice down there, perhaps. Wasgob thinks my next game should be Chins, following up on Cheeks, of course. Chins. Interesting. Not sure about that, though. We'll put it in the maybe pile. In fact, it's not even going in the maybe pile. I'm going to bake it right in the center of a maybe pie. How's that for you? Okay, so any other games that are going into another edition that anyone can think of? Doesn't look like it right now, but if anyone shouts one out, then I'll come back to it later. So, topic for discussion. There are two main juicy topics I want to delve into right now. And I'm going to drag up the old screen share to show you this, because this has been a relatively controversial subject in the Kings of War community. This is the Clash of Kings tournament pack with the rules amendments for the tournament. So some people's reaction to this was immediately that they're just nerfing flyers, and a lot of people cried over it, and a lot of blood, tears, and nerd sweat was spilt all over the forums. Very, very unfortunate. So let's just go through it, shall we? And I'll give you my thoughts on it, and then after this I'll go back to some of the games that are going into second editions that people suggest. So first of all, Cursed Pharaoh and the Ammonite Pharaoh dropped to Defense 5 rather than 6, which is fair enough. Anything that has Defense 6 is pretty obscene, especially when you can make it fly. The Wings of Honey Maze, for example, I've played using the Flying Vampire numerous times, and it's not particularly easy to deal with, because when you defend 6 and flying, the flying will allow you to virtually pick where you're going to be fighting, and then having defense 6 means that if you hand pick an opponent that doesn't have any crushing strength or anything like that, you're almost invincible, especially for some of these units that have regen, or they can wound you and get wounds back like pharaohs and vampires do. So very, very, very tough if you allow them to fly and have defense 6. And as far as I'm aware, the pharaohs weren't as expensive as a vampire, so I can understand why they dropped the defense on those for tournaments. Now here's a very controversial, juicy bit. So fly, units that fly, basically, if they become, disordered, there we go. If they become disordered, then they lose the ability to fly. So if they take wounds in close combat, they can't just fly over that unit that hurt them and land behind them safely. You're pretty much stuck. You also lose nimble as well, unless you already have nimble through being an individual, for instance. Yeah. So I think that is a great change, because one of the problems I've found is that you're kind of forced to bring a list that's really overcompensating for the fact you might come up against flyers. And I think that's a problem, because obviously there are ways of dealing with it. You just have to build a very specific way. Like with my goblins, I would just have to take lots of lightning bolts and wizards and war trombones and anything that can just turn around on the spot and just shoot willy-nilly, basically. Breath weapons and such to deal with flyers. But I don't want to just see people bringing endless war trombones. I want balanced lists to be able to compete. And I think flyers, as they were, while they wouldn't guarantee you a win, they would guarantee that people would have to build their armies in a certain way to go up against them. And I think that is the main problem. People who defend flyers would, of course, say, well, you could do this, this, and this, but that's not really what I want to see. Luke's APS says people have been overreacting to these changes. Yes, they certainly have. So let's see what else they changed here. So you can only take 3 of the same type of unit, which isn't that much of a problem, really, even if you want to make a spam list. For example, if I wanted to spam trolls, I could still take 3 troll hordes and 3 troll regiments, as far as I'm aware, unless they amended that, because that's what they were going towards. Let's see. You cannot select the same unit entry of type, war engine, hero, or monster. Oh, it's only war machines, monsters, and heroes you can't do it with. Yeah, so the one that was kicking around prior to the official one coming out was that you couldn't take 3 of the same of anything. But now it's limited to war engines, heroes, or monsters, which is fair enough. But it still means you could spam some of the units that are deemed to be more powerful. But then Kings of War is more balanced than many other games. So people generally do take slightly more balanced lists. Allies. You cannot select the same allied unit entry type of war machine, hero, or monster more than once. Okay, so that's fair enough. And magical artifacts cannot be given to any allied units. That's quite a big one as well, because a lot of people like to find the one piece of cheese in another army and then just take it as an ally. The big one was ogre shooters with the brew of key and Inus. Because I'm going to get onto another point about Kings of War and the artifact point values in a minute. But you can find a sweet spot where there's a unit that's really, really good and expensive enough to warrant spending a lot on an artifact, and then just ally in that unit. And it's more powerful than it should be, because you're not having any of the drawbacks of using that army as a whole. You're just taking the one really juicy piece out of it. Luke's APS, my brother's 3 war trombones and 3 Bane chanting whiz. Yes, that is very, very nasty indeed. War trombones are very tasty. I'd say they're right on the borderline between delicious and dishlicious, in fact. And then, before I talk about these scenarios here, I'll come back to this in a moment, but I want to talk about the point values of artifacts in Kings of War. So, obviously what they're going for by having just a blanket list of artifacts that any unit in the game can take is that other games become incredibly bloated, don't they? Because every single unit usually has multiple upgrade options, or every army has several pages of items that that army specifically can take, which makes everything very difficult to keep track of. And usually people just arrow in on the good ones anyway and ignore the rest. So it's just too much. So I can see why they wanted to simplify it by just having one big list of universal items. However, the point values of those items aren't necessarily fair when you're applying them to different units. So if you take a 50-point item, for example, or just a really expensive item at all, like something that gives you +1 to hit, let's say, you put that on a really cheap unit of goblins or a unit of 10 ghouls, you're not really getting your value out of that. If you put it on a horde of ogres, that's an obscene amount of points, then the value of it is being spread around the unit more evenly. So it's better value. So obviously certain units are just never going to have certain upgrades taken on them. There are a couple of ways they could have potentially tried to get around this. They could have put a different point value depending on whether a unit that you take the item on is a horde, a regiment, or a troop. You could have given them, or an individual, you could have given them 3 or 4 different point values per item, which of course would have been fairly complicated, but it would have been a little bit more balanced. But that would only be going part of the way to addressing it. Obviously, to make it completely balanced, you would have to have a separate list of every item in the game, for each unit, and then tell us how many points it would be to give that item to this particular unit, because some units are going to benefit far more from having +1 to their move distance, for example. So you could go really, really complicated with it, and I can understand fully why they haven't done that, because that would be way too excessive, far too much text, and the core of the game is to keep things very, very simple, so I can understand why. It's just, I think maybe it's gone one step too far in simplifying. The fact that everyone pays the same points for the same items, even though their troops may not be getting as much value out of it as other people's troops. Let's see what people are saying about that. Luke's APS, I think TOs will eventually put a scale in place, and he thinks goblins are broken. Well, my goblins certainly aren't broken. My goblins are perfectly fair and just. But I'd be interested to hear if anyone in the audience who's got some experience of Kings of War tournaments, as much or more as I do, what you think about this, because I don't think it would take a huge amount to slightly fix it. Maybe if there's one killer combination that's really out of line with everything else, putting a little amendment in there saying if this particular unit takes this, add a certain number of points. But then you get all little extra rules all over the place that people might not have kept track of. It's a tough one, isn't it? Luke's APS, the rules committee seems to do well at finding the balance between tweaking. I'm sure he's not trying to say twerking there. Although if the rules committee did make a twerking video, I'm sure it would do quite well. So balance between tweaking for balance and keeping it simple. I think they've got it pretty damn close. It's just when I look at my goblins who want to take a nice artifact, it's not really worth them doing it when they're lined up against a really expensive ogre unit that can take the same artifact for the same price but get a lot more out of it, if you see what I'm saying. So just a side note there. Be interested to see what people think about that in the old comments. Let's go back over here then and look at the extra scenarios they've added for this tournament. And I'm sure a lot of other tournaments will adopt all these rules, by the way. So, scenarios. First of all, invade and dominate. They've made a slight alteration so that it's half the point value of individuals or war engines are scored if they're in the scoring area, which is fair enough, because there were quite a lot of individuals that, since they can get that free pivot before moving, they were just turning around and hopping into the scoring zone in the final turn, and they're quite difficult to stop doing that because they're so agile. And war engines, not so sure about that one. For individuals, I definitely agree though. I think you should be rewarded if you manage to get a war engine, especially into the center of the table and dominate. That's quite difficult. So I agree with individual. With loot and push being a new one, then while carrying loot counters, then you can't use fly or nimble special rules, which I think was already played in a couple of tournaments. And I like that as well. It stops people coming in and just flying onto the loot and flying off with it really easily, which I think is quite balancing. Pillage, war engines cannot capture control objectives in this scenario. Again, punishing war engines. I don't know about that. And I'm not sure that's entirely fair. Although, I suppose one thing it does kind of stop, maybe, is stopping people trying to pile up objectives on the table edges and then just dropping war machines on them, especially if they're up against an army that needs to advance on those war machines. Because you can kind of force the enemy to kind of walk into your wall of death gun line. So maybe I can understand it that way. Push is a new scenario, which is very much like loot, except you can't take them off the table, and the markers are positioned in a slightly more random fashion. There are slightly more of them. So, yeah, another scenario that gets people moving around the table more. The scenarios like that are always welcome. There's just another variation on it, which I think is fine. I don't see an issue with this one at all. Let's see, Master Dwalin, where can I find these rules? I will put a link to these in the description at the end when I finish this video, in case people want to look at these. So I'm kind of in the habit of just deleting the URL of everything that I'm screen sharing before the show goes live, so people don't see all my file paths and such. Also, so I'm not giving any free advertising to any websites that I'm stealing things from. And I think there is another scenario as well. Yeah, here. Control. This is something I quite like, which is a spin on the invade scenario, really, kind of. So the table's divided up like that, and you get points if you control any of these squares by having more troops in there than the enemy, pretty much. And you get a bonus one if you're controlling the other person's central area here, because that's supposed to be the most difficult one to control, so you get an extra point for that. And I quite like this. I don't think it'll be hugely different from the way invade works right now, but it will get people spreading out more, I would say. And that can only be a good thing, I think, because the last thing you want is just to have games where everyone is focused on one side of the table and someone just puts like one throwaway unit down at this end and they don't even bother sending anyone over there to deal with it. It's nice to have a good spread out game, especially at the tournaments where there's quite a lot of terrain as well. Because if the enemy really focus in on one side and you're playing, let's say, goblins, where you have some really big units that find it difficult, or undead units that find it difficult to move between terrain, if you're forced to just kind of go all on one side, then you can get very, very cramped going between buildings, which is quite tricky. So I don't see any issues with these new scenarios. They sound pretty good to me. Let's see what people are saying about this then. Boom13R says anything for movement is good. Yes, anything that makes you move is good. That's why I'm a fan of the 40k objective cards that make you dance around the table going for different points rather than just line up and kill each other. Skeleton Flower, Kings of War seems really fun. I want to get into it since they have a fish army. He loves him some fish people. Yes, the fish people are quite an interesting feature of Kings of War. Everyone loves fish people. So I think that's everything I want to look at on this particular issue. But I'd be interested if anyone who's watching this after the show as well has got any comments on these modified Kings of War rules that they want to leave in the permanent comments section once the show is finished. Get some discussion going on that, because of course I would be able to moderate the debate in a much more even-handed than the tyrannical Kings of War Facebook group admins, which are of course all evil and okay, they're not really, they're actually quite fair. But they do have a reputation just because they've had to lay down the ban hammer on some people. So I'm going to stop that particular screen share. And oh, we've got 19 viewers right now. Not bad for episode 1. I'm sure once people get into the habit of tuning in at a particular time on Friday nights, because of course everyone wants to spend their Friday night staring at a wall of green with my luxurious hair in front of it, which ordinarily I would probably cut it now, because look at that. That is some serious hair. And what more can you say on it? Right in the face. But because my hair has developed a reputation as being so luxurious and magnificent, and the audience seems to love it so much, I feel like I can't possibly cut it off yet. I may have to wait for it to get really, really annoying. What happened last night was it kind of formed a mask. Like this bit of hair here curled around under my eye. It's not doing it now, but come on, do it. There we go. It was kind of like that, and it was quite impressive. I must say, if I could fashion it like that at all times, that would be quite impressive. Luke's APS, not enough orange in front of the screen. Well, there will be orange when I get the nice orange backdrop, and usually I'm wearing orange. I would have this orange jacket on as well, except it's quite hot at the moment, as everybody all around the world can attest to. I'm sure in a lot of places it's been especially hot. I've seen people on Facebook posting the old, I'm not saying it's hot in insert my hometown here, but 2 hobbits just threw a ring into my backyard or whatever. So it's quite hot in the old northern hemisphere at the moment, I dare say. Skeleton Flower, hashtag Fabio2D6. Look at that. Okay, we're going to break into another topic now. And this one is going to be 40k related. So, I firmly believe that Deathwing in 40k suck monkey nuts. I defy anyone to tell me that they don't and explain how to use them better. Because I'll give you my issues. I've got the old Dark Angels book right here, and I'm looking at the rules right now. I really would like to take pure Deathwing armies. That's my dream. I think they look incredibly cool. However, to start with, I don't think Terminators are that good anyway, because of the prevalence of weaponry that just either negates most of their save or indeed all of it in some cases, and the fact that they're so expensive for one wound models. I know Newbie is going to be arguing with me fervently here. He's already said that I'm speaking heresy. So come on, Newbie, lay some truth on me if you think what I'm saying is wrong. So my main issue is with the new Dark Angels Codex. I say new, it's quite a few months old now. The Deathwing Strike Force. So you need to have an HQ and 2 units of elites, so 2 units of Terminators of some kind. So that's quite a hefty chunk of points already. Now, all these units have to begin in Deep Strike. And the way Deathwing work now, they can't Deep Strike in turn 1. They used to be able to just come in on turn 1 automatically if you felt like it. You could pick turn 1 or 2, but everyone always chose turn 1, because why wouldn't you? But they just Deep Strike like normal units now. So that is a huge issue for me, because then, because I like Deathwing Knights, you're not going to be charging anything until at the earliest turn 3. And the rest of your army, a huge chunk of your army is sitting in Deep Strike for at least a turn, while the rest of your army is being shot to bits. So depending on the point level of the game, it could be up to like 75% of your army in Deep Strike. Or if you want to take an all Deathwing army, it could be 100% of it, but I think you just auto lose under those circumstances. So you can't just take it as your entire army. Has anyone argued yet? Newbie hasn't made an argument yet. I would say at least Deathwing Knights should have 2 wounds. But anyway, I'll get back to them in a minute. So, if this detachment is your primary detachment, yes, probably will be, you can re-roll the result on the Dark Angels Warlord trait table. Okay. And also, units, when they Deep Strike in, they can either shoot and then run, or run and then shoot. Okay. That's all very well, but I would rather be able to charge when Deep Striking in. That would make it really nice. They do still have the rule where they're twin linked on the turn that they come in when they Deep Strike, which is nice for shooting. And then you can run, which is going to get you, what, another couple of inches? And I don't think that's really enough. You're basically sitting ducks when you Deep Strike in, especially when I play against Tau, who have that. A lot of their units have a rule where they can just shoot at things that chose to Deep Strike in, which is not pleasant at all. And so many big template weapons with AP2 around there that just land on top of squads of Deep Striking Terminators. Not fun at all, especially Deathwing Knights. And Deathwing Knights are a problem, as far as I'm concerned. When you bunch them all together, when they're in base contact with each other, they get +1 toughness. Okay. That's one thing, makes you toughness 5. That's fine if you're against, let's say, a wall of lasguns. That's actually going to make a bit of a difference there. But the main things I would consider a threat are the big giant template weapons that probably have strength 7 or above anyway, the really hardcore ones. So getting that extra +1 to your toughness makes no difference whatsoever. All you're doing is making yourself a template target by bunching up like that. So if it was +2 or 3 to the toughness, then we'd be talking. If they had 2 wounds, then fine, we'd be talking. And their other rule, there's a couple of other things, but one of the other issues, their smite attack, which is once per game, of course. So if you take a standard squad size, which is 5, then you can have 4 of them that can potentially do a smite once per game, which only gives you 1 attack, but it's a really good attack with really high strength, good against high toughness models. Or it gives them AP2 as well, so it's really good against enemy Terminators and so on. And their weapons don't strike last. All this sounds very good right now. But when someone lands that big template on them, on the 1 or 2 turns it's going to take them after Deep Striking to actually charge somebody. Because who in their right mind is going to sit right next to Deathwing Knights and not attack them, for example, and not shoot them when they Deep Strike in? Then the amount of them that are going to be left to use their smite attack is probably not going to be that high, because you're probably going to preserve the sergeant. So they're just going to drop like flies, and the punch of that attack is going to be severely limited. What I'd liked to do in the previous edition, what I started doing was actually deploying them in a Land Raider and just charging them directly out of it because it's an assault vehicle. But someone tell me, can you deep strike a Land Raider? And if you deep strike a Land Raider, can it have troops in it? If the answer to either of those questions is no, then that means that I wouldn't be able to use the Deathwing strike force, because all units in the detachment must begin in deep strike reserve. I just want to look what people are saying already now before I ramble on anymore. Let's see what we've got. Has Newbie put in any words of wisdom yet? Not yet. Dreddy played Nerdwing, I assume that's Deathwing, for a while back in 5th or 6th edition. They were always very hit and miss. Yes. Sebastian Blau, all Space Marines should have multiple wounds, to be fair. Well, if you read the fluff, they probably should be. Skeleton Flower plays a pure Thousand Suns army for years. Several different Chaos books. Most armies seem amazing compared to that. Deathwing Knights in a Land Raider, not teleporting, says Newbie. Okay, yes, well, I just mentioned that, Mr. Noobster. So does this mean I wouldn't be able to use the Deathwing strike force by not deep striking, or can you in fact deep strike a Land Raider? Well, yep, there we go. You can't deep strike Land Raiders apparently, which is what I thought. So that kind of rules out using the strike force, unless I just take 2 units of Terminators and an HQ and teleport them in and put the Knights in a Land Raider, which is going to be a huge, huge amount of points. I'm just not seeing it, I'm afraid. My other issue, actually, yeah, one big thing there. If the Deathwing Knights are in a Land Raider, that's probably going to be my only thing that's deployed in this case, because the amount of points that costs, plus the Terminators I need to deep strike in for taking an all Deathwing list. So that's going to attract a lot of fire in the first turn, I would imagine, which wouldn't be very pleasant. Land Raiders, they're survivable, but not against the barrage of twin-link las cannons that I seem to come up against in every game. Let's see. YouTube Newbie, it says you have to be Deathwing or be a dedicated transport in all caps. Yes. I don't see what you're saying, Mr. Noob. You have to go into more detail on that, Noobster. Another thing, now I'm not a 40k expert by any means, so if I'm totally wrong, I want people to tell me, because I want to be able to get the most out of my Deathwing. That's why I'm doing this. So let me know if there's something I'm overlooking. Another thing that grinds on my beard a little bit, interrogator chaplains. Now, I was told interrogator chaplains are like the ultimate accompaniment for Terminators and anything in close combat. They're just absolute monsters. However, I seem to think that they're only that great when you send them in against Chaos, because then they have the preferred enemy Chaos Space Marines, which they give to their entire squad. So that means that your Deathwing squad as well would have hatred of Chaos Space Marines, which would allow you to reroll, which with Deathwing Knights would be really handy for those smite attacks where you only get one of them, so you need your percentages really up to actually get them to hit in the first place. But when not against Chaos, I'm struggling to see the benefits. So if anyone knows of good ways to use chaplains when you're not against Chaos, then let me know. And this opens up another avenue of discussion here. Having specific rules against certain opponents, because you're paying the same amount of points whether you're against Chaos or not. So why should they just be better against Chaos than other armies? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. They're still equally as expensive when you're playing against Tau. They're just not as good. Does that seem fair to anybody? I would say no. The only way it would be fair, I suppose, would be if Chaos had an exact equivalent rule so that they have hatred against Dark Angels. Someone tell me if that is the case, in which case it would balance out, and that you're just supposed to ignore the fact they have that rule, really, because it's just a special thing for when they're up against Chaos. That really isn't that much of a bonus if they were to both have it, which is the only way it would make sense, which is also the only way it wouldn't make sense. So it's just weird in general. Yeah, so if anyone's got any Deathwing or Dark Angels tips in general. Another thing, the Dreadnoughts. I like the old Dark Angels Dreadnought loadout with the missile launcher and the las cannon, the twin-link las cannon, but the missile launcher seems to be just way worse than a Cyclone missile launcher, but it's on a Dreadnought, so in theory it should be more powerful, if anything. Has anyone got any different weapon loadouts to suggest for Dreadnoughts? Because I find the missile launcher misses every single time because it's not twin-linked. And of course the las cannon, which is twin-linked, hits, so I don't even need the reroll. That's just the way things go. Newbie, I can only type at a certain speed, Andy. Hee hee. You could have fooled me, Newbie. You can type like an absolute demon. Let's see. Newbie, so Land Raider can come in from a table edge from normal reserves, not deep strike. Yes, that's interesting. That's definitely a slight plus. It's sounding a bit better. Can units charge out of it on the turn it comes in from reserve? Noob, that's what I want to know. If they can, then I can see potential uses for it. Let's see, if you couldn't use normal Land Raider and deploy it in reserves, then you couldn't use Azrael, Ezekiel, or Asmodee, as they are Deathwing, but don't wear Terminator armor. Okay, I kind of see what you're saying there, Noob, but I think you're not quite addressing the issue that I have. So, okay, bringing it in from a table edge, I can live with that. If I can put my Deathwing Knights in there and then charge them straight out of it when it comes in from the table edge. If I can do that, that would be a definite idea that I would explore. So while Newbie is talking about, oh, actually, we've got some more comments up there. Above the wall of noob, Brendan Duffy is here. Hello. Yes, Gloomdreddy, we just mishap everything 70% of the time. Well, deep strike mishaps are, of course, very, very annoying. If I use Belial, then they don't scatter, of course. So that mitigates that problem, but you can't put him in every squad, of course, which is a problem. But right now, I'm going to show you some images from the 40k game I had the other day. I don't feel like doing a full battle report on this. But here, now this is what I call a dead squad. They've spent more of their time dead in my games than they have alive. I don't think they've ever made it through turn 3 ever in a game. My Dark Angels tactical squad. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the fact that I play a lot of Deathwing, so they're one of the only things on the table. So everyone immediately guns them down in the first turn. I even put them behind a wall to give them some cover as well. But no. Next to an objective there as well. So that was my plan. They were going to hold that objective for the whole game. But of course, they're a Dark Angels tactical squad, so they just die instantly. And I thought, I'll put my Dreadnought in this crater to give him a cover save as well next to that objective. Surely that's going to work. I was against Tau. You can see it was a lot of battle suits here. And this lovely battle mat, which I did a video on the other day. And you can see I've got a bit of shine in some of the pictures here because I hadn't yet learned about these. I'm not sure what the material is, but it's like a kitchen floor almost. And from certain angles it can shine. So you've got to be careful when you're taking pictures of it. More Tau filth. Just tons of battle suits all over the place, and this bad boy as well. And there's you can see a nice layout of the table. All I've got on the table is a tactical squad and a Dreadnought up there, because all my Deathwing are in deep strike. All his stuff's on the table, and he's got some stealth suits that just decided they wanted to appear behind my army instead of in front, just to be nice, which is always fun. See, there they are. Extra stealthy. Not as stealthy as people that just leave a blank base and call it a stealth suit. And there, look at that. This is after turn 1. They're reduced to 4. Wow, wow, wow. Because, of course, people shooting at them from behind are ignoring that nice wall I put there as cover. And look at just this wall of death here. Now, this big guy here and the tank both have the ability to shoot at things that deep strike in. So I was trying to avoid that, which didn't leave me much space to position my deep striking troops. And, oh, what do you know? My Dreadnought got blown up in turn 1. In fact, I replaced it with this smouldering explosion marker available from Bad Squiddo Games. So yeah, that died immediately. I think I actually got pretty much tabled before my reserves came in, but we decided to waive that rule because it was only a friendly game. And there, I managed to get my Terminators out of sight and actually land perfectly in that spot. One of the few places that they couldn't be shot as soon as they landed. But I don't think they'd be long for this world regardless. Then the Deathwing Knights as well, they managed to land. So the fact that my reserves came in and didn't scatter into terrain, that's probably the first time that's ever happened with both of my deep striking units. You can see I've got the chaplain with these guys. And this was quite funny. My opponent fired a huge big gun at my Deathwing Knights, and it scattered onto his own battlesuits in comical circumstances. And it killed a couple of them, I think, which was hilarious. This was before I'd achieved any kills, so I was celebrating that. And this bad boy got blown up as well, because my Terminators that came in behind the building were able to shoot it in the butt repeatedly, and the explosion marker was moved onto that. Now, look, Deathwing Knights, they've already been whittled down. 2 of them got killed before they got close to combat. And that's what I was saying earlier with their maces. Using that smite attack is all very well, but you have to actually get into combat before you're all dead. So deep striking them in seems to be really, really bad. Especially since some of the Deathwing special deep strike rules are for shooting. It seems like the shooter units should be deep striking in, but it's the close combat ones that you want to get closer to the enemy, as the name would suggest. YouTube Newbie is not a fan of Tau, by the way. That's as polite as I'm going to be about it, because he's used slightly more colourful language than I'm willing to on a live broadcast. Let's see. And these Terminators here, they were fairly untouched for a while, and you can see I've started whittling down his forces. But Tau have this ultimate filth where they can jump around, shoot you, and then they can spring away multiple d6 inches in the assault phase just away from you. I don't know if that's just a battlesuit thing. I assume it is, but everything he had was a battlesuit. So there was no chance of me catching any of his troops. And the way the objectives were going, I was getting objective cards to take objectives miles away from me. And of course, all my Terminators were never going to get to them. So if he wanted, he was so far ahead on victory points, he could have just taken some of his troops and just jumped behind terrain and hid for the rest of the game and won, because I would have never been able to get there. He could have even jumped out, shot, and then hid again, and still I would have been unable to catch him. When Deathwing Knights do get into combat, they are pretty damn tasty, and the chaplain is as well. But you can see they just get whittled down too fast. They're too fragile. Everything in 40k, I think, is too fragile. Everything can kill everything almost. There are very few things that are survivable against the kind of stuff people actually bring into the games. There's so much low AP weaponry or D weapons all over the place. And yeah, just chewing through some battlesuits. I start to turn the tide a little bit once I actually do get into combat, because he's not got that many models in his army. And once I start smashing face, you can see he's only got those 2 models left there at the end. I think this is an end of the game image. He's got those 2 left and a stealth suit, and I've just got those 4 Terminators. But I'm never going to be able to catch anything, and I'm behind on points, so ain't going to happen. And at the end, I think I've only got these 2 left because he shot some more, and that's all he's got left. I think I shot the last stealth suit as well. So he won by a large margin in objectives, but we only had 2 models left each. So yeah. The fact that I lost half the models in my army before the rest of them even came in was really annoying, and that didn't used to happen to me with Deathwing, because I'm used to being able to just drop in turn 1, which was very, very nice. And it was the one thing that made Deathwing unique, in my opinion, compared to all the other kinds of Terminators, because whenever I would pull that and say, okay, I get to decide when I deep strike in and I don't have to roll, then they would say, what? So my Terminators have to roll? That's ridiculous. And it would make me feel good about playing Deathwing. But then they took that away, and they didn't really replace it with anything significant as far as I can see. Right, let's see what Newbie thinks about this. So reserves coming on at the beginning of your turn, so you can reach the enemy in cruising speed movement. When you deploy the Terminators within 6 inches of the assault ramp, then you're fine. Okay, so does that mean I can immediately assault from the assault ramp when it comes in? Just confirmation? Because if I can, then I'll definitely give that a try, deep striking a Land Raider, as obscene an amount of points as that would be in reserves. Possibly not even coming in until turn 3 or 4. Lots of people not being very nice to Tau in the comments here. Was Gob, the spring ability is called Tau Do You Do? Yes. Very nice. So anyway, should I just avoid playing Tau? Deathwing tips. If you're not watching this live, just drop a comment in there, because I'm badly in need of advice. If there's certain units I should be taking, if you think maybe a Deathwing command squad would be nice, any particular reasons you think I should go for something like that, then let me know. Any other strategies, any war gear I should be taking, any particular commanders or characters that would help big time against all this weaponry that can just shred through Terminator armor as soon as it lands, I would be very, very grateful. So let's stop that screen share, shall we? And let's have a look what people were suggesting as other games that are moving on to new editions, because I did see one. Oh yeah, Relics, Graham Rigg. Well, I haven't really looked into the old Relics 2nd edition. I probably should at some point, since I do have so many models for it, and I know a lot of people that like playing it. Some of them aren't that far away. So it's definitely on the agenda at some point. It's just, I think, interest in the whole community kind of cooled temporarily for a while. I don't think the KoW faction quite captured people's imagination as much as they thought they probably would. I could be wrong. They could be huge and thriving. They certainly didn't capture my imagination really, though. But I'd be interested in seeing what's fixed in the 2nd edition of Relics. There were a few things that were wrong, like the morale system. It didn't really mesh with the rest of the rules. And probably magic as well was a little bit off compared to everything else. They had the one mechanic which was rolling doubles for most things, and then when it came to spells and armor saves, then suddenly that was out the window, and you had a different dice mechanic and morale tests. So I'd like to see all those things bring in line. Maybe they've done that. I'll have to look into it. If anyone knows more and wants to drop in a comment before I have to look into it myself, then feel free. But yeah, Relics, definitely. I've got enough models, so it's worth doing. And also, it's another one of those that's good for hangout games. Anyone who saw the Relics Hangout League will have seen that that was quite fun, although it didn't get very many views. I think each one of those videos only got about 100 views on it in total, the Relics Hangout games, with about 2 live viewers, and one of those probably each person involved in the game. Let's see. YouTube newbie. You don't deep strike the Land Raider, it comes on through normal reserves. Yes, I know what you meant, but I'm just used to referring to it as deep strike rather than reserves. But yes, I would play it as a reserve. Skeleton Flower hates the look of Tau. Bum bum bum. Will you be getting the new Titan Legions game when it's eventually released? Was Gob? Well, some of you may know that Titan Legions was actually my first purchased miniature wargame. So if that does come back, I would be seriously tempted. That would tempt me a lot more than the return of Blood Bowl, let's say, which I was never hugely into. But Titan Legions would definitely grab me firmly somewhere about the body, I'm sure. Graham Rigg, Relics beta rules on the website. Yes, I'll have to check them out at some point to see what's been changed exactly, and then I'll report back with my findings. Because it seems a waste to have all those models sitting in a drawer and not using them. It's been a little while since I played a game of Relics. The tournament scene seemed to dry up in this part of the country, unfortunately. So what I'm going to do now, as well as addressing any questions that come in the live comments, I'm going to go to the questions and Andy section, the Q&A, as it were. You get it? That's quite funny because my name begins with the same letter as the word answers. So that's the joke. So here are a couple that I had prior to the episode. This is from a chap named Reese. Do you think 40k is following the Flames of War route, with formations being the more dominant list builder and the bigger is better rule lineup? Do you think there will be any force org chart in the future? And do you think with the quick releases and new rules and models coming out every week, it's becoming hard to keep up and deterring people from joining the game? I think he's specifically talking about GW here. But if they're going to a monthly White Dwarf, does that mean that they're still going to be doing as many weekly releases? We'll see whether that changes and coincides with the change of the White Dwarf timing, because you would think they'd want to publicize all their new releases as much as possible, and if they haven't got a brand new magazine featuring it all, we shall see, won't we? But for the first part of his point, do you think 40k is going to be more formations led? I would say that's how GW are leaning all their games at the moment. Age of Sigmar's gone a very similar way. You get an awful lot of bonuses for playing specific army lists that they give you in advance. And I think there's a few very good reasons for that. One, any unit that happens to be part of that formation that you need to have that makes the models you already have more powerful, you're going to have to go out and buy, even if it's something you weren't considering before. If you just bought units A, B, and C, but you need unit D to really make them explode and become amazing, even if you're not a huge fan of unit D, you're probably still going to buy it. Also, whenever they release a new one of these formations, they don't have to release a whole new book. They can just put it in a White Dwarf, or even just on the website or anywhere for download. Anytime a new formation comes out, they can readdress the balance of the game, and any unit that's not selling very well suddenly can go really high in people's estimations, because if you pair it with this unit, suddenly it's amazing without having to release a new army book. So I think it's definitely a strategy. Obviously sales led like everything else is. So if those units are suddenly incredible compared to how they were before, people are definitely going to purchase them with more regularity. And let's see, what's the other part? Will there be a force org chart? I think games, for the most part, GW's games are probably moving away from that. They want you to take whatever you want, but you'll get all these spicy, extra juicy bonuses if you take this particular list. That seems to be the way they're going with it. They're nudging you towards using something that's more fluffy and in keeping with what they had in mind. But if you want, you can take whatever you want. That seems to be the way they're going with it, both their main games at the moment. I can't see that changing. It's a definite strategy that they've had in place for a while now, and I think 40k is definitely going to get Age of Sigmarified to some extent, definitely. Before I go on to the next question, YouTube Newbie has a comment. A 10-man Deathwing squad with 2 plasma cannons is better than a Deathwing command squad with a company master or librarian or chaplain with the eye of the unseen item. Better than a Deathwing command squad. With a company master, I assume he means the company master goes with the 10-man squad. Is that right? It gives the unit preferred enemy. Okay, that's tasty. Preferred enemy against everything. I hope so, not just chaos, because, as I said, I'm not a fan of very army-specific opponent rules like that. YouTube Newbie thinks all armies should have their own unique force org chart. Not entirely sure about that. That's a bit more complicated, but you can make more themed armies, I suppose, that way. If, for example, a certain army is supposed to have lots of, let's say, fast attack choices, but then you could just make them troops in their book if you wanted it to be like that. So I'm not sure every army needs their own force org chart. Dreddy, anyone interested in the new Lost Patrol board game from GW? It already existed at some point, was called Ultramarines or something. I did see that on the website, actually. Let's have a look at that right now. Let me just load up that page, because I didn't even think that was new, because it looked familiar. So I didn't even bother really looking at it. So, here we go, let's see. Lost Patrol. Moraz 3, a deadly jungle world filled with danger and fear, populated by ferocious aliens who wait in the undergrowth to pounce on the unwary and mercilessly kill anyone who stumbles across them. Even the plant life itself is malignant here, constantly twisting and growing in unnatural ways to trap its prey. A dropship containing vitally important information. Oh. Well, I think I'll stop there after I misspeak. It's a good time to end that little dramatic reading. So, it's got Space Marine Scouts in it. Rotating Space Marine Scouts. I like how it auto-rotates when you load up the 360 view, even when I didn't want it to. It's got Gene Stealers in it, because why not? If they're already in Space Hulk, every game should have Gene Stealers, surely. Now, I don't know exactly how it works. If anyone knows more about it, then let me know. But immediately, it doesn't grab me at all. Only £35 though, so the price is more appealing than some of the other boxed games they've had, but then this looks considerably smaller than some of the others. It just doesn't really appeal to me, unfortunately. It just looks pretty bland, if you ask me. Anyone else has any thoughts on it, then go nuts. Bazooka J. Rambo wished they made new scout models. Yeah, these... they don't really look like they've been updated too much over the years, do they? The old Space Marine Scouts. That is a ridiculously huge bicep on that guy. Look at that. Look at the width of his arm. Look at the pure girth. No wonder they got him to carry the heavy bolter. Right, so I think that's enough of that. So, not very interesting, unfortunately, is my answer to that one. Boom 13R says, reminds me of Advanced Space Crusade. Was it from about 20 years ago, only smaller? Does kind of look like that, doesn't it? Tiny Space Crusade, let's call it that from now on. So, a question that came in the question and Andy section from Skeleton Flower. Is there a game out there you feel like you want to get into, or at least give it a try for some reason, just haven't? Yes. The main one probably would be Waste Man, because I really like the aesthetic, the kind of Fallout-esque post-apocalyptic, slightly tongue-in-cheek style of miniatures they have. However, as with a lot of games, it'd be difficult to find an opponent for it around here, because I don't really have any particular people that I can just play any game system I want with. Most of my opponents are kind of loyal to one or two systems, and I just play those games with them. So we shall see. If anyone around here was interested in Waste Man, though, I would definitely give it a try. And I'm hoping to at some point. I would at least like to get some of the miniatures. I think the Hazmatadors, guys in hazmat suits, are really cool. I think I want to get some of those at some point, because they're pretty tasty. Let's see. YouTube Newbie is giving me more advice here. It's saying there's some talk about Necrons being very unkillable. I think I've only played maybe 2 games against Necrons, at least in recent times. I used to have a few Necrons when they first came out, well, the metal ones, the one that came free on the front of White Dwarf. I had them, and the one thing I remember about them was that they were really unkillable, apart from the Necron Destroyer, which could be blown up really easily, except then the pilot would crawl out the wreckage, and he would then be harder to kill than the flying vehicle was, which never made sense to me. But anyway, let's see, Bazooka J. Rambo. I'd used the game to play with Predator-style guardsmen I converted into characters in the movie. That sounds like fun, actually. If they're all based on the characters from Predator. I'd like to see you do a video on that, Mr. Bazooka J. Rambo. I think that would be very interesting to look at. Boom 13R, they're bringing out loads of board games at the moment. Seems to be the new market strategy for GW. Yes, it certainly does. Is that because maybe they're cheaper to produce, perhaps? Because card is very cheap to make, and they can maybe use miniatures that are already available, or they can make available in other box sets at the same time, or release side by side, or they're multi-purpose miniatures. Like if you look at the Silver Tower, those miniatures can be used for Age of Sigmar. I imagine these 40k games, you can use all the models in 40k as well. So yeah, a lot of board games. Specialist games and board games, though, from GW, it's not exactly a new crazy innovation. It's just something they stopped doing for many years for some unknown reason, apart from occasionally finding a huge crate of 800 copies of Space Hulk in a warehouse somewhere in Sweden that they forgot about, which they can release just in time for Christmas, so all the people who had them for £500 on eBay suddenly start panicking and soil themselves. But yeah, it's not too crazy. It just seems like a good move. Get more products out there, wider range of appeal on your stuff, more people buying your games, more people spending money on your products. And board games, of course, don't take up a huge amount of space compared to a full miniatures line that takes up an entire wall with all the different ranges. So yeah, I think that's good. Let's see, Graham Rigg, on the topic of relics, says they've added an Overwatch rule for ranged weapons, fires at end of turn. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that. Boom 13R also gets people into big games. They stopped in the early 2000s producing some great specialist games. Yes, they certainly did. I never played Epic 40,000, but I did like the look of it. I did play, well, I say I played Titan Legions. I didn't actually play it that much because some of my friends found it too complicated and they wanted to play 40k instead. So I didn't play a huge amount of it, but I really liked the models, and I had quite a lot of them. And I regret getting rid of it to this day. More so than I regret getting rid of Warhammer Quest back in the day, because I was never hugely into that. For some reason I preferred the kind of simpler Hero Quest type games. Yes, Epic was amazing, but Epic 40,000, I heard some good things about it. And if Epic is coming back, I can feel my wallet trying to escape from my pocket right now just at the sound of the word Epic. Let's see. Oh, we've got our first terrible, ridiculous spam message in the comments. Someone talking about the imminent return of Jesus Christ, oddly enough. There is a first time for everything. That's the first time we've had one of those on this channel. I've had a few people telling everyone to get lives and stop playing with miniatures, and a few people leaving anti-Age of Sigmar comments on the Andy and Rem show, but never anything about our Lord and Saviour coming back to cleanse everyone of their sins or something. Very strange indeed. But that person has had the banhammer dropped on him. Let's see. YouTube newbie, the return of the Emperor. What's the deal with the Emperor in 40k? Can he actually get up off his throne? Is what I want to know. I'm not so huge on the fluff, as many people would know, since I usually make up my own silly backstories for all my games. But I suppose it is kind of interesting. There's a guy on a throne just feasting on people's souls or whatever he's doing. Kind of reminds me of the Dark Crystal, where they have to consume the souls or the life essences of the small, unfortunate creatures to stay young. I imagine the Emperor is quite similar to that, which makes him sound quite evil. But then Space Marines are a bit more evil than you would imagine, aren't they? Apparently he can't move, he's in some sort of life support. Well, I hope no one vacuuming near his throne accidentally pulls out the plug, because that could be fatal. Gloomdreader Gaming, they should catapult the Emperor into the Eye of Terror. That is a board game I would get behind. If it had one of those practical little catapults with rubber bands, you could actually fire people into the Eye of Terror. That would be amazing. Board games like that don't seem to exist as much anymore. Maybe they do, but they're all just directed at kids, so I don't really see them. But there used to be a lot of fun board games with practical things you could do, buttons you would press that would activate things on board. That kind of stuff's always fun. I shouldn't be saying all this live on the air, though. I could have had a really good Kickstarter campaign for catapulting people into the Eye of Terror. I'm sure I'd get sued, but I could just catapult into the nostril of terror, perhaps. Dreddy, best board game 2016. Yeah, it would be. If anyone wants me to come out with a nostril of terror, catapulting emperors into it board game, then hashtag nostril of terror. He does hoovering and bends down to pick up socks and everything when he thinks no one is looking. So you think the Emperor has a thing for housework, but only does it when no one's watching. Let's see if I've got any other topics that I urgently need to get to this week. I don't think so, so I think we can start to wrap this one up. So, in the future I am going to have guests on this show as well. I wanted to do this first one on my own in case it horribly crashed and burned and nobody watched it, then no one else would have to share my suffering. But I will be having guests in the future. Got a few people in mind, potentially, and going to be talking about other game systems and indeed the ones discussed on this show. So I may get guests specific to the topic that I want to discuss that week, anyone who's got some field of expertise, or I might talk to actual game creators as well about their games. That would be fun as well. I haven't done that kind of thing for a while. Apparently some people missed the Jesus spammer. Well, you weren't missing too much, don't worry. So, folks, if you've got any questions for the next 2D6 Friday, then don't hesitate to use hashtag #QuestionAndAndy, either here or on Twitter if you're a kind of social media icon like I am, in the Facebook as well. I've got a Facebook group for not just for this show but for the channel in general, which I set up, and there's going to be a link to that in the description down yonder if you want to go and join that group, and then you can see the latest postings, and hopefully people are going to be putting Wargaming news in there that they would like to see discussed on this show. 21 viewers. We've stayed steady around about 20, which I think is pretty damn good for the first ever edition. We didn't have a dramatic drop when I started talking about different game systems either, so that's a good sign. It shows that people aren't just tuning in for their game of choice and then disappearing as soon as I move on to something else, which is good. It shows that you're all here because I'm just an endless flowing fountain of charisma, like a cherub spitting water out of its mouth, except that water is actually charisma in verbal form rather than liquid. Let's see, great show, my first time commenting, as have time on Fridays from Boom13R. Well, I would like to see you leaving permanent comments on any videos that you can't catch live, sir, if you don't mind. Let's see, was Gob definitely more Wargaming news needed? Yes, that was an old classic comedy segment I used to do with the old moustache and drawn on chest hair. If anyone's never seen that, you should go back into my ancient videos because they were quite interesting. YouTube newbie, verbal charisma, eh? Yes. In fact, it's not only verbal, I think actually my charisma score has gone up by at least 5 points since my hair grew to this length. People just can't take their eyes off it. My words have more meaning and they have more impact when you're looking at the wonderfully swaying hair. I mean, look at that, that's some hardcore length. And look at that majestic hairline as well. Exactly the same since I was a small child. No receding going on around these parts. Look, I think they're either too manly, definitely, as you can tell by my facial hair, which is the pinnacle of manliness. Any last minute comments? Let's see. Anyone got anything really funny before I go off the air? YouTube newbie confirming that the new show was great. Yes. Graham Rigg suggests that the Emperor's life support is turned off. He'll be reborn as a warp deity, but no one wants to take the chance. Well, maybe. Might attract some dislikes with this. Maybe it was turned off and he was reborn as Sigmar. Bum, bum, bum. I think I'll leave you with that bombshell, folks. And no, I'm not going to sing. Nope, definitely not. Maybe next time. So, folks, I hope you thoroughly enjoyed this show. I hope you remember to refresh the page when it's over and leave a permanent comment if you're watching live, because permanent comments do last forever. That was supposed to sound a little more majestic than it actually did, I think. It was supposed to, you know, like puppies aren't just for Christmas, they're for life. It was supposed to be kind of like that, but I'm not sure if it worked exactly. So, hashtag too manly. Yes, that is the hashtag for this show, certainly. So with that, I'm going to say ta-ta, folks, and I'll see some of you on Tuesday, I'm sure, for the Andy and Rem show. Those of you who aren't Age of Sigmar inclined, I'll probably see you next week on 2D6 Friday.